You got a very broad career, 14 albums, platinum albums, #1 albums. When you look back on your career at this point, is there a greatest moment?
I don't know. I mean, there's not a singular moment. I think, funny enough, and I've watched it on YouTube. You know, your life passes before your eyes now on YouTube. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and it was still 90 minutes, and he had you do 2 songs. Then we were invited in spring or summer of '86, after Honky Tonk Man had broken out and become a hit. We were at the precipice of, you know, success. We felt, when I say we, the band that was with me at the time and myself, my producer, Pete Anderson, and I felt when we did our record release show at the Roxy down on the Strip, that night felt like the culmination of chapter 1, you know, or act 1, you know, and we were now moving into the body of the play, or, you know, whatever that was going to be, you know, in the journey of a career. And I remember that the call came that they wanted us to appear on The Tonight Show. At the time, you know, still the preeminent late night, you know, talk show was Johnny Carson.
It was a big deal.
Big deal. And he played the drums with us on Guitars Cadillacs. Honky Tonk Man we did first, and we did Guitars Cadillacs, the second song. And I remember they cut to him a couple of times, and he used to have a habit. He was a drummer, and he liked playing drums. And he was playing along the shuffle with pencils. And I see that now, and I think, you know, what a moment. And he called me over, and that was a big deal. And I said, and with the Grand National Champion bubblegum blowing contest winner, the auspicious beginning of things for me on The Tonight Show. And it ended up that I ended up holding a record with Jay on The Tonight Show, you know, doing it. So I hadn't thought about that as you asked. I never thought of a singular moment, but if I was pressed, that was a big moment. And I just, in terms of a sense of, you know, holding in perspective something had happened, you know, for that generation, because we were on the street here in LA playing all the clubs, Club Lingerie, Club 88 out on Pico, Madame Wong's West, Hong Kong Cafe, Owl's Bar, the Palomino, but this rock circuit in LA. And that was the paradigm. So we had moved into another kind of arena of performance.
I want to talk about the various stages of your career, but when did you realize that music was going to be your career?
Yeah, I think in an absolute sense, once I'd moved to California, I'd gone to Nashville briefly. Nobody knew I came and went in the night at that point, you know, in Nashville. And I had a buddy that played lead guitar for me in my high school rockabilly band. And he had family on the West Coast. And he said, you got to go with me. I'm going out there. I'm moving out there this summer. So I sold my brother my '68 Impala, took what belongings I had, my guitar, and headed west. And music was always the thing that was centermost in my mind. But I had acted when I was young. I'd done theater, and I thought, you know, in California, the opportunity maybe to act is going to be there. And in Nashville, there wasn't really an environment to perform in. And I knew there was one in California. I had known about the Palomino. I knew about other clubs. And so we got to LA, and I did a play. I think the fall of '77, when I was first out here, or maybe '78, I did a play and realized that actors are completely at the mercy of opportunity. I did the lead in something. I actually won an award at the Long Beach Playhouse for doing it, and couldn't get an agent to even come and talk to me, or couldn't, you know, interest anybody. So I really realized that my focus would remain with that guitar in my hands. I controlled my destiny a little more.
So when you first came here, you weren't really sure that music was going to be it?
Music was the first love, and it was the thing that I did without the aid of kind of a collaborative, group of people. But I had enjoyed theater so much, and I thought, wow, it'd be fun to act. It'd be great to do that and pursue that as a form of expression and maybe a means of making a living. But it wasn't meant to be. The real, the natural gift was there with me and a guitar and my voice.
So when did you move to LA, and what was going on in the music scene in LA when you got here?
Well, I got here in '77, the spring of '70. I dropped out of Ohio State. I think winter quarter. I think I dropped out winter quarter of '77, but I headed west then and got here, and it was at the sort of the waning moments of what country rock had been late '60s, early '70s, which was really the that Western horizon that I kind of tracked toward. I mean, the things that had happened in my late teens up to I was 20 years old at that point. I used to say that I was born in Kentucky, raised in Ohio, but grew up in California. Because when you move somewhere, in college, your college years, you tend to evolve into your adulthood in that place. And that's what happened when I arrived here. And what was going on here was a transition. The Eagles and Fleetwood Mac and Linda Ronstadt, principally the Eagles and Linda Ronstadt, had exploded beyond the parameters of country rock and become pop icons by that point. And then, of course, Fleetwood Mac had moved from being this odd British blues band that Warner's had spent 9 albums, supporting, and exploded again into this other kind of commercial, kind of stratosphere that nobody had expected. So that had gone on, and Emmylou Harris was still here. She was the beacon that I navigated toward, because I knew she was still doing traditional country music. The thing that was connected to Buck and Merle, Buck Owens, Merle Haggard, and that West Coast country sound, and doing it with a pertinence that my generation had an affinity to. So that drew me here, but it had quieted, but there was still a live scene. I was living in Long Beach the first couple of years, and I got together, and that's where I did the play, and was meeting a couple of musicians there, but I knew I had to come up into the valley to the Palomino because they had a hoot night that I'd heard about. And I went in there and started to meet people of like mind, and that's where I started finding, and it took me a year or so to really get my sea legs and find musicians that I could play with. And I started playing the bars in the valley.
Did you know when you got here that the other influences that you were seeing in California were going to infuse your own music?
Yeah, because they already had, the Byrds had been there, the American Beatles. And I said to Chris Hillman, we were talking a couple of years ago, I wrote the foreword for Hot Burrito about the Flying Burrito Brothers. And I mentioned to him then I'd watched, there was an anniversary collection of CDs and a DVD that come out of the Byrds. I said, that was what was always cool about you guys. Roger or Jim, whichever, with the granny glasses, but you weren't condescendingly aloof, but you were detached in a California cool kind of way. This was on television, so it transcended the state boundaries. It was hitting us within Ohio and wherever. And he said, well, in L.A., we had played, I don't know if it was Cicero's, I can't remember the club, for like the 4 months leading up to when Tambourine Man climbed the charts. We were playing as a house band on the Sunset Strip, and we were building momentum. He said, any given night we might look out and Marlon Brando would be at a table with a bunch of people, or, other movie stars, Warren Beatty would come in and watch him. He said, so we became the thing. And he said, so we were not kind of nonplussed about when we were out playing, you know, shindig or whatever. He said, and I think there's that element of California that happens to you in LA and Hollywood as much as anything. You know, when you play the Sunset Strip for 2 and 3 years, kind of fist fighting your way through it. And any given night, I mean, I remember Steve Berlin, who was producing The Blast, who produced Los Lobos and was playing with them, I looked over and he introduced us to, you know, he came to see us with Melanie Griffith. And you know, there were people like that were around what we were doing. So I think we were impacted by the fact of the time and place we were doing what we were doing. You know, it's unique in this town. Probably New York City has a similar, you know, and London did in the 60s. You know, I mean, it had an environment that was very sobering.
It was a time, I guess, where a lot of cultures were colliding musically. You talk about some of the actors who would show up at the gigs, and you were playing a lot.
Yeah.
When did you move from just playing the clubs to deciding, I want to record these songs? Tell us about Guitars and Cadillacs.
Well, that was early. I had done demo tapes at United Western, the old, it was originally United Studios and then Western Studios down at Sunset and Gower. And I had played in a bar way out in the northeast end of the valley with a drummer from Tulsa. And he knew the Tulsa music scene is unique and in terms of their own cross-pollination. And he loved what I was doing. He introduced me to a recording engineer there. So I began recording at like 23 years old. I was driving air freight during the day. I had an air freight driving job all over LA because I didn't have to sit still in an office by doing it. And I would get off work and go down to United Western, and on this particular engineer, Gordon Schrock's spec time, I would start cutting demos with some really capable musicians. Glenn D. Harden on piano, David Mansfield on mandolin and violin, fiddle, J.D. Maness on steel, Jerry McGee on guitar, drummers that I worked with, and a bass player named Robert Wilson. We cut demos. Not much happened with that. A year and a half transpires, and this scene had started simmering here, you know, the cowpunk. And I met a lead guitar player named Pete Anderson, and he and I began conspiring. And this is probably about 81, 82.
When you say you were conspiring, what was in your head?
Thinking about those original Buck Owens records and what made them so great and unique. The fact that they didn't use studio musicians. He took his honky-tonk band into Capitol Records on Vine Street and recorded the Bakersfield sound in LA and Hollywood. And so we began discussing why those records worked and collaborating in our process about that. And he said to me at one point, look, I think that my calling is to be a producer. You know, he's a great lead guitar player. And he said, but that's not what I aspire. I aspire to produce. He said, and I would love to produce you, you know, if we can figure out how to do it. So we both started in 82, really be just at the front end of that cowpunk scene. We hadn't really started playing the rock clubs yet. We were still playing, getting fired from various country bars because I wasn't playing the top 40 country list, you know, the song playlist. And Pete and I continued to, you know, I got together what little bit of money I could, you know, pull together to go in and record a 6-song EP. And that's what we did. And the title track, I titled it Guitars, Cadillacs, et cetera, after hearing a friend of mine in a bar one night make a remark that the music business, he was this great guy, Bill Campbell, great blues guitar player from Austin, Texas, that influenced many others that came after him. And he was a friend of mine out here. He'd played the scene, and he was kind of having his ear chewed by a guy, and we were watching some local band out in the valley at a club, and he had heard enough, and this guy was telling us about what the music business was about, and he leaned over, and he went, I just always figured it was about guitars and Cadillacs. I thought, yeah, that's exactly what the music business is about, isn't it, Bill? And I thought about that the next day again. And he didn't remember saying it was an offhanded remark in the conversation when and I guess that's what songwriters do. You hear something that, and I thought, man, that is, I'd been out here 8 years at that point, struggling. I'd moved furniture for a living. I'd driven this air freight for a living. And I wrote that song. But then we'd cut we'd run out of money. We'd cut the 6 songs we'd had for the EP, and we had somebody agreeing to press and distribute. So the dilemma was I couldn't cut the title track. So I titled the EP that, with the song, created but not able to be recorded, and put the EP out, and things began to gain traction.
Well, things did move pretty quickly from then on, and a bunch of albums, and then
what I talked about a minute ago was compressed a 1.5 year period there of that meeting Pete, performing in the clubs, doing the EP, and then in '84 it comes out. So from late '82 to '84 is when that happened. From there, it still took another year, but it was a quick year.
Things were starting to move.
Fast year.
Tell us about Ain't That Lonely Yet.
Ain't That Lonely Yet is sort of stage 2 of a rocket, Guitars Cadillacs launched everything. And there was an ebb and flow to things. I had I wasn't a chart darling, but I had hits. I had the first album had 2 hits at Honky Tonk Man, Guitars Cadillac. Second album had 4 top 5 singles. Starting with Little Sister, Little Ways, Please Please Baby, and Always Late. So 2 covers, 2 originals.
And you were crossing over as well with this stuff.
Well, we had begun on MTV, and it was actually, we played on MTV with the Cutting Edge show and other things until we had country radio hits and kind of got ostracized. Now, in Canada and Europe, we were never ostracized. We were kind of left to our own devices, and kind of that alt-rock crowd followed us, the guys that listened to, I think, Rockpile, Nick Lowe. I remember Dave Edmonds came out to our first series of club shows in London and watched us. And we got to, probably 1993 and put out this time, and Ain't That Lonely really exploded. And that, we had been platinum on the previous albums, the 4 previous studio albums, platinum plus, but that came out of the gate and went triple platinum and ended up selling 4 million records. So that shifted gears and put us in another,
I was going to say, what kind of difference did that make to your life?
Well, not much, because my life had evolved. Unlike motion pictures, I said this because I had friends that I've watched have a motion picture that opened over a weekend and literally would change. They would go from obscurity to world, notoriety.
Everyone knows you.
Yeah, and it really does happen that fast with a film when it releases. Records take a longer track, and so a hit single took 12 to 14 weeks, to kind of climb the charts. So you need 2 or 3 of those to have a hit album. So it really took a year for the first album, and so for people to, so it was an evolution. It didn't happen. So that album, it changed things, except that, we went back in and recorded not version 2 of that, which would have probably, put me on the path to be a little bit, maybe more commercially successful, to have exaggerated that success.
Sure.
But maybe it have been more redundant and repetitive, and that didn't happen. But I was proud of everything we did up to then and after,
Well, and you've done a lot of things, and you've worked with a lot of people, and you mentioned working with the alternative country guys, and you've influenced a lot of people as well. Tell me about working with Beck.
Working with Beck was almost kind of a full circle moment, in that I said 3 pairs in preceding this album, Secondhand Heart, is a continuum, of thought, of a thought. And that thought is about something that I put in the form of a song on the album, the last studio album that preceded 3 Pairs, which was 7 years earlier. It was titled Blame the Vein. song was called I Want to Love Again. And it's in the context of a romantic kind of relationship kind of expression. But it was about music. And I wanted to feel young again, like the lyrics said, about music. And Beck has that approach. He's a very literate guy musically, an extremely gifted artist, but he also is fearless in what he does. And the two of us collaborating on the first track on that, A Heart Like Mine, kind of gave birth to the sonic that would be on that album and then come to fruition on this album. And that's sort of a reckless electric guitar, you know, adolescent, teenage expression.
What does fearless mean to you in music? Being fearless?
I think it has to do with being true to what you feel compelled to do, not thinking about what will bring you success, but what will satisfy you first and foremost, because that's the only thing that really has any chance of satisfying anybody else listening to it in the long run.
Let's talk about the new album, Secondhand Heart. Just came out.
Yeah.
How does that represent you as an artist today, do you think? And what have you learned through your years of playing music, writing music, recording music that you've brought to this album?
Yeah, I guess everything. For lack of a more tedious answer, everything.
How does it represent you as a man?
I don't know. I don't think about music that way. I can't. I mean, it's not what I'm supposed to, you know. I said to somebody else in an interview recently, I said, I'll concern myself with the what, but I don't want to know the why. I'm not gonna try and overanalyze the why. What you watch today, what we're doing, and you know, is the what of things. But the why needs to be left to itself. You know, it's like the why. I don't know. I just want to kind of look around the room. When I say I remove my eyes, because I hear music like out here somewhere. When I start to write a song, what's that? Wow, what's that? What's that I'm hearing? The why, I don't want to, you know, it's not pertinent for me. I'm not. I mean, in retrospect, I can always kind of look at things. I don't really write in a literal sense. I'm not journaling my life. And I say that, and I'll contradict it by saying, in a literal sense, I'm not, but I'm certainly doing it in a composite. And it's experiences that I've had, I've witnessed other people have, experiences I have with the people in my life immediately, but again, I think there's something to be said for the magic and mystery of music and the magic garden of it, you know?
I'm going to push you.
Push me? You ain't going to push me. Go ahead. You can ask me that same question again?
Yeah, I'm going to rephrase it.
Okay.
You've recorded 14 albums, right?
Uh-huh.
The Dwight Yoakam who recorded that first EP has got to be a little bit different from the guy who just recorded this new album.
Well, in some ways, I mean, certainly more aware of the mechanics of all of it. Mechanics in capital letters, not, you know, the macro mechanic, not just the business, the world, and the cyclic nature of things and timing of things. So I probably am, but as much as I'm different, I'm the same. And that's what Beck kind of bumped into me with. He made me recall that EP and the immediacy of that, not the literalness of it. It's not the same music. Again, because of the aggression that I'm, approaching the electric guitar with instead of for rhythm guitar and not the acoustic and things like that. Although he and I, the other track we did was very, acoustic on 3 pairs. But I think he challenged me to be free about what I was doing with it again, which was there at that first album. That EP, there's no rules. We were breaking rules. We weren't doing the traditional things that were being done in recorded music in 1981, 2, 3.
So to a certain extent, it's full circle.
Yeah, it feels like that. This album, very much so.
Are you looking forward to taking these new songs out on the road?
Very much so. We put them through their paces today. They put us through our paces, in terms, because they're structurally different than things I've done, prior to this. In the case of She and one that we didn't believe, we did it live at our record release show. The other one, that we did today, In Another World. Those things they're going to be great to explore and to start to own. Because you don't own a song when you write it and record it. You only own it after you live with it in performance for a time. It's like they're relationships. Each song that I've written and recorded and performed is a relationship that evolves. And, what we're doing today is really, we're trying to set up housekeeping. We just got married, that song and me. Barely knew each other. It was a rush to the altar, that song. all the songs on this album. And it's kind of it's fascinating. It's just to hyperextend the metaphors.
I know you think of yourself and you are more than a country musician, but you've had an influence on country music. Do you recognize that?
There are times when I think that what I did maybe impacted other artists, or maybe some people that came after me. I don't really consider it often, and I don't know what for me. And what you did at Like Morning Becomes Eclectic was kind of formatless. It was free of formatting. You were, that expression on that particular show was like that. And that's what musicians, I think, approach music as. We kind of don't categorize ourselves until the commercial entities that need to, market what we're doing do so. I think that's why it's interesting I listened to all forms of music as a kid. Now, I was born into rural southeast Kentucky. Pikeville, Kentucky is in the deepest, darkest of the coal mining regions of Appalachia and the hollers that the Hatfields and McCoys literally came out of. So that's in my DNA. And it shows up unavoidably in anything I do music. It's always going to be there. So that gave me a certain freedom. At some point, the first 3 albums felt like I needed to illustrate what I'd come from. The next 3 albums, I began to, in my studio album career, began to allow the disparate influences from the AM car radio that I was pushing buttons in as a kid, and then later as a teenager driving my own car, and then as an adult. And the albums after that have become kind of their own furthered expression of all those influences.
I've heard you use the word freedom 3 times in our conversation. What does freedom mean to you?
And quote Chris, It's just another word for nothing left to lose. What was it? Nothing ain't worth nothing, but it's free. Freedom means that you didn't feel you had to compromise anything, and I didn't feel I ever had to compromise. That's the great fortune of my career in life, is that I, although asked at times, ultimately never was compromised.
It's been great talking to you.
It's been good to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Nick.
And for bringing the band.
They're a good bunch, those guys.
They're pretty good. And as I said at the
Eugene
beginning,
Edwards on lead guitar, Elliot James on all the utility instruments. Anything he picks up, he plays. Mitch Marine on drums, and Brett Simons on bass. They're really talented guys, and I'm fortunate to be playing with them.
thanks again, mate.
And thank you.